Welcome to this licensing committee meeting on Monday, the 29th of July at 7 p.m. The first item on the agenda is to ratify the appointment of the chairman, Councillor Hinwood, and the vice chairman, Councillor Mockford, as agreed at the annual council on the 15th of May. Do I have general affirmation of that? Thank you very much. Item number 2 is to receive one, Councillor Kennedy. Are there any others? That's sufficient. Thank you very much. Item number 3, to receive declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda. Do I have any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Item number 4, to agree by general affirmation the minutes of the previous meeting held on February 20th, 2024. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. To consider any items that the chairman agrees, I have none. Item number 6, amendments to the Hackney carriage and private hire policy as a result of DFT best practice guidance 2023, and that's on item number 6 in your papers. So, Mr. Bryan, can I address this to you?
Thank you, Chair. This report before the committee is to seek the committee's views on proposed amendments to the Hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy in connection with the issue of the Department of Transport best practice guidance, which was issued in 2023. In November 2023, the DFT revised the best practice guidance for licensing authorities in England. This is the first revision since 2010 of the statutory standards. The non-statutory best practice guidance is intended to assist the licensing authorities, but it's only guidance and doesn't intend to give a definitive statement of the law. And it stresses it is for local licensing authorities to make decisions in the first instance. However, it does give guidance as to what they feel should be taking place within policies. The licensing team have gone through the best practice guidance and identified a number of areas which would need to be revised to be in accordance with the best practice guidance. These being on the points-based enforcement system. As the committee are aware, we've had a penalty point system which has been in place for at least 5 to 6 years. When it was initially brought in, there was some discussion by this committee as to whether or not the point should last on drivers' licences for 2 or 3 years. It was decided at that time for 2 years was the time which this committee felt was appropriate. The Department of Transport have looked at penalty point systems, and their recommendation is that the point should remain on a driver's record for 36 months, for 3 years. And so it's proposed that the duration of our penalty points is increased to 36 months in order to align with the guidance. There is disability awareness training for private hire operators. The committee will be aware that we mandate disability awareness training to all licensed drivers, and that has been rolled out to all drivers. But it's recognised that operators who are not licensed drivers should also undertake disability awareness training, and so it's recommended that this requirement is also included within our policy. With regard to vehicle identification and signage, the guidance states that licensing authorities should not permit roof signs of any kind on private hire vehicles. The committee will be aware that back in, I believe, 2012, when the policy was revised, roof signs were allowed on private hire vehicles. The reason that the guidance recommends against having roof signs is because there can be some confusion amongst the public in identification of Hackney vehicles and private hire vehicles. Where they've all got roof signs, it's quite easy for private hire vehicles to be mistaken for taxis. So therefore, the recommendation is that the requirement to, or the option of having a roof sign is no longer permitted within our policy, and that's removed. With regard to emergency equipment, our current policy requires all vehicles to carry fire extinguishers. In the report, the committee will note that the National Fire Chief Council recommends that where licensing authorities require fire extinguishers to be provided in vehicles, they should ensure that suitable and sufficient training is received by the drivers. And in fact, their advice is that the safest way to tackle a fire for drivers is for them to exit the vehicle and to dial 999 and not attempt to tackle the fire themselves. Especially the committee will be aware if there's a fire in the engine and the bonnet's open, there's an immediate risk of flashover. So the recommendation within the report is that the condition to carry a fire extinguisher is removed and the appropriate advice is provided to drivers. Wheelchair assessment tests. Again, that goes hand in hand, in essence, with the disability awareness. We require that wheelchair assessment tests must be undertaken by all drivers who operate wheelchair accessible vehicles. And that is so they can demonstrate that they can load and unload and carry disabled passengers in a safe manner. So we recommend that the policy is amended, that the vehicle proprietor also has to ensure that any driver they rent their vehicle to has the appropriate qualification in loading and unloading wheelchair passengers. At the moment, where vehicles are rented out by proprietors, it's sometimes difficult for the licensing team to be able to identify those drivers early to ensure that they have got the appropriate qualification. We may not come across them until they've been driving the vehicle for a few weeks, where it's essential that they receive the qualification and the training prior to actually starting to transport wheelchair users. The amendments will be published for an 8-week public consultation. The consultees are outlined within the report. And this draft policy is put before yourselves to recommend to go out to consultation.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. So open for discussion. Any committee members wish to comment on these proposals? Yes, Councillor de Bell.
I was just wondering, John, they don't have to carry a fire extinguisher, but they can if they wish, because on some occasions, they're quite useful, especially with the electric cars and things like that. We're not going to say they can't take fire extinguishers, but they don't have to per se anymore, yeah?
That's correct, Councillor. It won't be mandated that they have to carry them, but if they wish to carry one, they certainly can.
That's fantastic.
Okay, yes, correct. Any other comments? Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chairman. On the vehicle identification signage, does it include within ours, because we do say that all taxis should say are white and others are multicoloured. Does that, because this was put in 2010, you said? So it's updated. I know they all know it's white, but if for the public consultation, do we not want to include the fact that taxis are all white and all others are not white?
Councillor, certainly, we can certainly include within the consultation. The particular item here is just with regard to the removal of roof boxes from private hire vehicles, rather than the colour scheme of vehicles. But it will probably be quite useful, again, as part of the consultation exercise to reinforce the difference in colour for members of the public as well.
Okay, so Mr. Bryan, how would you add this on to this? We're looking at C. What words would you use to extend this particular signage and identification?
So at Part C, it would be that they recommended that the policy is amended to reflect the guidance, so the private hire vehicles will no longer be permitted to display a roof sign, and as part of the public consultation, the public will be reminded that Hackney vehicles within mid-Sussex are white.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Any other comments from the committee? Yes, Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, Janice. Just wanted to know, you mentioned about if the taxi license holder actually rents his vehicle out, it takes about a few weeks for you to find out. Now, is it not mandatory that they let you know before they rent a vehicle out to somebody, so that you know straight away who's driving that vehicle. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Mia, I couldn't quite hear your question. Could you repeat it, please?
You just need to get a bit closer.
Thank you.
Sorry, Janice.
Sorry, I know, no, I don't think I'm deaf, but
No,
thank you
no,
for
no, that's
accommodating
fine.
me.
So what I was saying, as Mr. Bryan said, until drivers driven the taxi for a few weeks, they don't know actually that vehicle has been rented out. So is it not mandatory for the driver to actually let the licensing department know that they are renting their vehicle out, so that the licensing officer is fully aware? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yes, Councillor, that's a very good point. Unfortunately, it's not mandated within the vehicle conditions that we need to be made aware with Hackney vehicles if they're rented out to other drivers. Obviously, they can only be rented out to drivers who possess a Mid-Sussex District Council Hackney driver's licence. But unfortunately, we're not always told promptly when vehicles are rented out, and quite often vehicles are rented out to different people at different times. You may well find that with a particular vehicle, sometimes it's rented out to two people. So one person will drive it during the day, one person in the evening. So it can be difficult for the licensing team to keep track of who's driving what vehicle, because they do interchange quite frequently. But obviously it's a consideration if the committee felt that to add a condition similar to what you've suggested into the Hackney vehicle licence conditions, and consult on that as well.
Yeah, thank you for your explanation. I feel that something like that would be good and appropriate. Thank you.
Right, so Mr. Bryan, you'll have to phrase, this is supposed to go out consultation with the other items for the 8 weeks, so we'll have to phrase an addition recommendation.
Certainly, I would suggest that with E, that we add in that where it says it's therefore recommended the policy is amended so that the proprietor of a wheelchair accessible vehicle is responsible for ensuring any driver of the vehicle has completed the wheelchair assessment course, that the proprietor of the vehicle is also responsible for informing the licensing team within 24 hours of any change of driver to their vehicle.
Thank you very much, yes. All right, Councillor Mia, that sounds good. Thank you very much. Any other additions, comments? Councillor Kenny.
Thanks very much. I think it's a really good point that's been raised. And although we've solved one part of it, which is knowing who the new driver is, the heart of the problem was people's ability to handle customers who have with disability and to load them. So the key issue, it seems to me, is making sure that cabs which are enabled for disabled use are only driven by people who know how to effect it. Otherwise, it just causes confusion on all parts, because you might, as a customer, you might be very aggrieved. The person might say, well, I don't know how to use the equipment that I've got. So that seems to me to be the heart of the problem. And looking to the wider issue of we hoped for expansion of the number of fully disabled taxis that are on the road. It might be that's the space where we need to attack it, being clear about the training for those people, and also being clear about anyone who drives one of those is fully trained.
Thank you, Councillor. Within the current policy, we do mandate that drivers of wheelchair accessible vehicles must do the wheelchair assessment test. The issue that we don't want to slip through the net is where drivers rent vehicles is the possibility of drivers who haven't done that particular test driving a wheelchair accessible vehicle. But I certainly take on the point, and we do address it within the policy, but I think we need to tighten up the policy in respect of vehicles which are rented to drivers, and also put the onus onto the vehicle proprietor to ensure that the person they're renting their vehicle to is properly trained.
So, Mr. Bryan, is there any way under E, where we're discussing wheelchair assessments, is there any way we can actually tighten up on that particular issue? I mean, I get the idea. If a driver has had wheelchair accessible training, then we expect that particular driver to be always driving the appropriate vehicle. But what we're saying, what I think, is that some vehicles can be rented out or some have another driver.
That's correct, Chair, and that's what this is to address, because vehicle proprietors can rent their vehicles out to other licensed drivers. And we do have some vehicle proprietors who have 3 or 4 vehicles and obviously rent their vehicles out, which then provides an income to them. But what we want to ensure is that the driver they rent their vehicle out, if it is a wheelchair accessible vehicle, is properly trained. And this will therefore put the onus onto the vehicle proprietor
Yes.
to ensure that they're properly trained as well.
They're absolutely correct. The third paragraph states that quite clearly. Thank you very much for that. Any other comments on this particular issue? So if we go back.
Sorry,
Oh, I
sorry,
beg your
Chairman.
pardon, yeah, I'm.
Sorry, I was a bit slow on the
Yeah,
button.
just-
Just picking up on your point, John, there. So if the person who had been rented the vehicle to, they had a disabled vehicle and they refused a disabled passenger, would they be subject to our penalty scheme?
In that case, councillor, if we had a driver of a wheelchair accessible vehicle who refused a disabled passenger, firstly, we would be looking to gather sufficient evidence for a prosecution because they'd commit offences under the Equality Act, and also sufficient evidence and information to bring the driver before the Sub-A committee. An incident like that wouldn't be dealt with through the penalty points. It would come straight to yourselves, or if there was sufficient evidence, to prosecution.
Even if they were untrained but had that disabled vehicle?
Well, there's no excuse for someone to refuse, if they're driving a wheelchair accessible vehicle, to refuse someone in a wheelchair. And this is the whole point. They should be trained before they start driving it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So we're now going back to page 5, the recommendation. The committee is recommended to endorse the amendments to the Hackney carriage. And we have a little additional, which we've added into the recommendations. And private hire licensing policy at Appendix 1 before public consultation of 8 weeks. So please vote for this. Thank you. So that's 12, every member. Thank you very, very much. That's unanimous support for those recommendations. All right, we now go on to item number 7, agenda item 7, and this is introduction of card readers for licensed vehicles. So, Mr. Bryan, would you like to address this, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report before the committee addresses an issue which has resulted in a large number of complaints to the licensing team over the past 18 months to 2 years. We've received significant complaints about licensed drivers refusing to accept car payments. That has caused concerns surrounding public safety, and so therefore the proposal before the committee tonight is to amend the policy to make the acceptance of electronic payments mandatory for licensed vehicles. Obviously, if the committee agree to accept the recommendation, then this would also be subject to the same consultation as the previous report. As part of the background, the committee would be aware that car payments in 2019 accounted for more than half of UK transactions at that time, and obviously since the COVID pandemic has increased significantly. And it does accelerate the move to a cashless society, whether we support that or not. It's where we are. And car payments account for over 70% of all transactions. Now, requiring licensed vehicles to accept car payments would provide customers with a guarantee they can use their card universally. There are concerns from some drivers with regard to accepting card payments. There can be cash flow problems. It sometimes takes a few days for funds to clear. Drivers who visit rural areas have concerns that they may not have the network coverage to be able to take the payments. But despite that, the underlying aim of the taxi policy is the protection of the public and to ensure the public have reasonable access to hackney carriage and private hire services. And the recent complaints have raised significant concerns around public safety. There have been a number of instances reported to us where lone females late at night have turned up at the railway station and gone to vehicles, and their only means of payment have been credit cards or electronic means. And the drivers have stated to them that they don't accept card payments. Anecdotally, a large number of drivers do have card payments or the means to accept electronic payments. However, if they perceive that the journey is a short journey, they will say to the prospective customer that they only accept cash. And this has resulted, as I said, in a number of complaints, some of which are attached at the appendix, from concerned members of the public who haven't been able to get home and, as I say, lone females who have had to walk home late at night. Obviously, where complaints are investigated where possible, but the vehicles concerned aren't always identified by the complainant. And it's considered that this issue needs to be addressed as soon as possible, rather than waiting for the formal review of the policy, which was due in May 2026. The amendment to the policy is proposed at will be at point 4.13, and it's suggested that once we've completed the public consultation and if it's agreed the policy for electronic payment should go ahead, that there should be a 2-month implementation period for drivers to give them time to transition to the new policy requirement. From myself and Mr. Hatcher's own visits to the rank, vast majority of vehicles do have the means to take electronic payments. The issue is that they state to customers that they only accept cash payments, whereas making it mandatory would remove that issue and obstacle for the public getting home. It's set out in the report 18, the proposed entry into the policy, and also in conjunction with that, it's proposed to amend the penalty point scheme for a driver failing to comply with the new conditions. Obviously, if we received a complaint that a driver refused to take a card payment and there wasn't a reasonable excuse for him refusing to, or her refusing to take the card payment, then initially, through our stepped approach, they could be dealt with through the penalty point system. As I said, we would look to consult on this amendment for 8 weeks. It would go hand in hand with the other amendments which we've just spoken about in respect of the licensing policy. And I'm ready for any questions which the panel may well have.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
About time too, Chairman, this is, as far as I'm concerned. Some of us remember a poor lady turned up at the rank, getting off a train, 8 o'clock in the morning, on a Sunday morning, and was swiftly marched around to Sainsbury's to draw out money because he wouldn't take a card. So, and he did come in front of the committee. There are 3 reasons why I think this is important, and there are those who say, oh, it's going to cost money. I was self-employed, I took payments, it's a taxable deduction, so I can't see where they're coming from on that one. Secondly, we wanted them to have video cameras in their car, in their cabs, remember? We all said this is a good idea to protect the passengers as well as protect the drivers. Take away the cash element from it, you're protecting them even more so. So there's that. And I think that's the 2 I really wanted to highlight. We're not saying they can't take cash. It's just that it's got to be an offered card or cash. And I do think it's important that we do it, because I must admit, if I ever use my card, it tells my phone already it's disappeared out of my account straight away. So I'm sure they will get to know about it. So I fully support this. This is an absolute must happen. It should have happened yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Marsh. Any other comments from the committee?
Thank you,
Councillor
Chairman.
Knight.
Yes, I fully support Councillor Marsh has just said. I mean, nowadays there are no cheap taxi fares, I can assure you. In fact, they're extremely exorbitant. Gatwick, I know, where it used to be like £30 to go to Cookfield. To my horror, it's now like £58, which is some idea of how taxi fares have gone up exponentially over the since COVID.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we look at the recommendation, on page 15, the committee is recommended to endorse amendments to the Hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy to make accepting electronic payments mandatory for licensed vehicles. This is before public consultation. It'll be out for 8 weeks public consultation. So if we can please vote for that. Okay, thank you very much. That's unanimous. Thank you very much, committee. Let us move on now to item number 8, wheelchair accessibility vehicles. I shall invite Mr. Bryan to introduce this report.
The report is to provide the licensing committee of details of issues which have been raised surrounding the availability of wheelchair accessible vehicles. It's been highlighted on members of the public, and the report identifies potential options to address this issue, and obviously prior to an 8-week public consultation. If there were significant amendments required following the public consultation, these would be reviewed by this committee. A petition consisting of 137 signatures highlighting the shortage of wheelchair-friendly taxis in Burgess Hill have been received. Submitted by a local resident and outlines a lack of availability of wheelchair accessible vehicles, which they state is unduly restricting the ability of disabled members of the public to access a taxi service. In accordance with the Constitution, it didn't trigger a council debate. However, the licensing team are proposing several options for the committee to consider, which may assist in addressing this issue. So the recommendation is that the committee consider the options below, which I will detail, and recommend that they're taken forward and subject to an 8-week public consultation. And the recommendation from officers is that option 3 be the one which is approved and then considered by public consultation. So the options are, option 1 is to increase the age limit for wheelchair accessible vehicles only, up to 12 years with an additional fitness test required every 4 months. So that's 3 times a year between years 10 and 12. Option 2, to remove the current cap on Hackney vehicle numbers, but with the proviso that all new licences will only be issued to wheelchair accessible vehicles and cannot be transferred to a saloon vehicle licence. And option 3, remove the cap on Hackney vehicle numbers, again, licences only for wheelchair accessible vehicles, and increase the age limit to 12 years with the additional fitness test as per option 1. Obviously, there is an option 4 of no change to the current policy in respect of cap numbers and the vehicle age restriction. Now, the background is that obviously the council licenses both the Hackney carriage vehicles and private hire vehicles, and we're aware that from anecdotally and from this petition that there is a shortage of available wheelchair accessible vehicles in the district, which can cause adverse effects to wheelchair and disabled users, limiting their ability to travel. Disabled people are particularly reliant on taxi and private hire vehicle services, either because they may not have access to a private car or unable to use public transport. So the availability of accessible, affordable taxi or private hire service can make a significant difference to them. The committee will be aware that this authority currently limits the number of Hackney vehicles to 154, and this limit has been in place since 2002. Of these 154 vehicles, 31 vehicle licences are allocated as wheelchair accessible vehicles, which is just over 20% of the total vehicle fleet. There are 2 wheelchair accessible vehicles which are private hire vehicles. However, they're licensed by a specialist school-run provider and they're not available to the general public. We do publish a list of wheelchair accessible proprietors who've consented for their details being circulated. But one of the issues is the majority of wheelchair accessible vehicles are concentrated in the Haywards Heath area, mainly servicing the railway station, which does result in a limited number of wheelchair accessible vehicles in other parts of the district. As the authority currently limits the number of Hackney vehicle licences, these do have a market value which can fluctuate according to demand. And the removal of a limit may impact on this market and impact those who have privately invested in a licence from another proprietor. I would point out that we have had several wheelchair accessible vehicle licences returned to us in the past 2 years, where the licence holders have been unable to sell them onto another proprietor. And although we do maintain a waiting list of drivers wanting Hackney carriage vehicles, they have refused the offer of a wheelchair accessible vehicle, mainly because they state the cost of a wheelchair accessible vehicle is significantly more than a saloon vehicle. And because there's a vehicle age limit, they can't see an adequate return on their investment in the vehicle. Now, the committee will also be aware that we commissioned an unmet demand survey, which we're required to do as having a cap on the numbers. And the last survey reported and was published in December 2022. As part of the survey, the licensing team did ask them to particularly canvass disabled users and disability groups, and the responses are summarised within the report and the conclusion of the unmet demand survey. They did say that the basis of their evidence gathered was that there isn't any evidence of unmet demand for the services of Hackney carriages within the Mid-Sussex District Council licensing area. The best practice guidance, which we spoke about 2 papers ago, does take a view on quantity restrictions. It mentions there that about the Competition and Markets Authority in their 2017 guidance, which state that quantity restrictions are not necessary to ensure the safety of passengers, and that the view of the Department of Transport is that there shouldn't be quantity controls. However, it does give the fact that if there is quantity controls, there should be, as we do, a regular unmet demand survey. There has been considerable litigation in the area, but if a local authority has considered all relevant matters, it can at any time decide to delimit the number of Hackney carriages. And many local authorities have opted for that policy. Subject to quality control mechanisms, for example, new licences only being released to vehicles which meet certain requirements, such as wheelchair accessible vehicles. It's therefore possible to delimit at any time, but the relevant matters which will need to be considered and will be consulted on as part of this process would be the financial impact on existing licence holders who may have invested in their licence, the potential of reduced custom for the existing licence holders, congestion on Hackney carriage stands, congestion on the roads generally, the benefits to the travelling public of additional vehicles, and obviously the opportunity for others to become involved in the trade as means of securing a livelihood. I must point out that it must be noted that issuing additional wheelchair accessible vehicle licences will not necessarily result in increased availability in all areas of the district. The drivers are self-employed, they can choose when and where they wish to work, and with trade concentrated around the 3 main railway stations in the 3 towns, this is where most of the work exists. And there's no legal provision for the council to dictate when or where a licence holder must operate. I would also point out, in respect of wheelchair accessible vehicles, that the licensing team currently has a vehicle licence which we're trying to issue. It's come back to the authority, and over the past 3 months, Mr. Hatcher has been trying to find someone on the waiting list who's willing to take on a wheelchair accessible vehicle as a brand new licence. But unfortunately, we still haven't been able to issue it, with the reasons being given that the prospective licence holders can't see an effective cost return by buying a second-hand vehicle and it only being available to be used for the 10 years. Hence the suggestion of the committee considering increasing the age limit on just wheelchair accessible vehicles. In the report, the committee will see, obviously I've detailed out our current vehicle age restrictions and the best practice. Any consultation will obviously cover all the interested parties in respect of the taxi and private hire licensing field. And the next steps would be for the committee to consider four options. Obviously, the fourth option is to do nothing. The options in front of them to decide which one you would wish us to take to public consultation, with a recommendation that we consider option 3 as perhaps being the one which gives the best opportunity of increasing the number of wheelchair accessible vehicles, with the caveat, though, that it may not, because drivers could just head to the railway stations and work from the railway stations, and we still have the same issues with regard to availability.
Thank you. Before we open the debate, could I ask Lucy Corrie to add to this discussion?
Thank you, Councillor Henwood. I just wanted to reassure the committee that we are, of course, aware of the petition that came to the council and the question that was asked at council last week. And yes, whilst the petition didn't meet the rules of the constitution and didn't go forward, I do want to emphasise that we really have listened to those concerns and we are really carefully considering how we can help. Now, you know, we're trying to address this through policy. That's the important thing. But of course, what we've got to remember is the commercial climate in which we live and work. And those drivers are self-employed and can choose where they work. And as John has said, unfortunately, we are holding a licence for a wheelchair accessible vehicle, which hasn't been issued yet. But we are hoping that these options will go some way to addressing those concerns that have been brought forward. And in particular, option 3, which would be to remove the cap on Hackney vehicle numbers and allow a 12-year age limit for a wheelchair accessible vehicle with those additional fitness checks put in place as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right. Councillor Marsh.
Councillor Eves
She
was
did.
before
Thank you
me.
very much. She did. I saw she flashed up there before you. Thank you. Councillor Eves. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to thank the officers very much for putting this on the agenda. I had asked a wheelchair user if she would come tonight and speak to us, and then I asked the officers and I was told she wouldn't be allowed to be here because there's no provision for the public to speak in this room. So I think that's a real shame, because it should be nothing about us without us, and it puts me in the rather iniquitous position of having to speak on behalf of wheelchair users when I really cannot imagine what it's like. So I'll do my best. I have been talking to 5 wheelchair users in Burgess Hill, some of whom cannot transfer. That means they can't get out of the wheelchair and sit in the taxi so the wheelchair can be bundled into the boot. They can't transfer. So the main difficulty they're having is getting hold of a WAV, wheelchair accessible vehicle, especially in Burgess Hill and especially after 5 o'clock. And this is partly exacerbated by the fact that Bluebird have withdrawn some of their services, at least temporarily. Everybody, all the wheelchair users love Bluebird, but even that is under stress at the moment. Now, there's a list here of the 31 WAVs, but I am told it does not really represent reality, because as we've heard, drivers don't have to take a disabled person in because they can say, well, I don't work evenings, I don't do from Burgess Hill, I don't, you know, so actually in practice, it's very difficult to get hold of a taxi. There was a question to full council, as you mentioned last Wednesday. The lady had wanted to come and put that in question, so she looked for a taxi, couldn't get one, couldn't get anyone to take her, to bring her here at 7. I couldn't take her because she can't transfer into a normal car. So, and another lady has written to me, I just want to read out a couple of sentences. She said, yesterday, while visiting my dad at the Princess Royal in Burgess Hill, I wanted to stay longer, visiting hours are 2 to 8 p.m. He is terminally ill with cancer. The last bus on a Sunday back to Burgess Hill was 5:17 p.m. We called every number on the WAV list and got no answer or got told no one was available. So I had to leave my father early. So that's the kind of thing they're up against. They can't get to the dentist. There's all sorts of problems. And sometimes the taxi man says, yes, he'll turn up, and he doesn't. So their whole life has to be built around trying to find a taxi that will take a WAV. I'm aware we need to consider the work-life balance of taxi drivers, I get that, and the amount they have paid for the licence. I understand a licence can be worth 50, £60,000. I don't know if that's true. No, not in this. Perhaps that's a Brighton thing. Perhaps Mr. Bryant can come back on that. But we also need to help the wheelchair users. They become prisoners in their own home. They can't get out there. One lady just wants to go to the pub for a pub quiz once a month. 12 times a year she wants a WAV and she can't get one. So ultimately, it's about their human rights and their ability to have a normal life. Option 3 is a really good proposal, but is it going to be enough? This is what you're thinking as well. I think the 4 monthly maintenance checks are quite onerous, to be honest, and I'm wondering whether 12 years is enough. Can we discuss 14 years, say? What do other authorities do? Could we add, these are questions to the officers, could we add a location on this list of 31, as in where they operate out of, or would that turn out to be just East Grinstead and Haywards Heath if we added that? And lastly, how will the district in the consultation reach out to wheelchair users? Because last time you only got 7 replies from wheelchair users. Which organisations do you reach out to so that we can actually get them to tell us what they think? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Rees. Before we progress to the other members, could I ask John, what's the licence fee, please?
The licence fee for a Hackney carriage vehicle is 288.
288, and so this is the Hackney.
That is for the actual licence. Because we have got a capped number of vehicle licences, it then does create this false market between drivers where, because they can't access a Hackney licence through the council, because we've got a capped number, it produces this market where they sell their licensed vehicles between each other for a premium. Now, that premium still exists for saloon vehicles. However, now there's no premium for wheelchair accessible vehicles, hence we're getting the licences returned back to us. Because they just can't sell them on to other drivers. Other drivers aren't interested because of the cost aspect and the making it financially viable. Prior to COVID, saloon vehicle licences were being exchanged within mid-Sussex for around about 15,000 to 16,000. And wheelchair accessible vehicles, I believe, around about between 7,000 and 8,000. Obviously, however, since COVID, those figures have certainly dropped, and obviously they're certainly non-existent for wheelchair accessible vehicles now. Just moving on, with regard to the list that the councillor mentioned, that's in fact the, looks like the section 165 list, which we're required to produce as part of the Disability, or the Equality Act, I should say. We do have another list on the website, which actually provides driver contact numbers. Not all drivers agree to have their contact details published, which obviously means that that list is nowhere near as long as the 165 list. And obviously there's GDPR issues of publishing people's contact telephone numbers if they haven't consented to it. With regard to the wheelchair accessible vehicles, there's 3 which are based up in East Grinstead, and I'm aware of probably about 3 or 4 which are based round the Burgess Hill area. The rest are based round, operate round Haywards Heath. However, the issue can be that even the vehicles which drivers live in Burgess Hill still work off the Haywards Heath railway rank, railway station rank, because that's where the majority of the trade is. On the last Met Demand survey, 90% of the Hackney trade was based around the 3 railway stations, and that's why they gravitate to those railway stations.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we can't really determine where the driver wishes to work from. That's the other issue. Yes, Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chairman. No, if we did that, we're in a communist state, aren't we? So we're not that.
Called socialism.
No, I go for communism. Right. This is very sad, and I do feel for all the disabled people. And in the licenses sub-A, we've had more than our fair share of so-called WAV taxis refusing to take taxis, disabled people, because they said got the wrong size wheelchair. Oh no, that's got a dog. I can't do this. I can't do that. You know. So you know it. Councillor Knight knows it, and all those who sat on licensing sub-A know it as well. Even if we were to say to the 154 taxis that we have currently on the register, and we made them all WAVs, you still get the same amount of people plying the trade up in East Grinstead, the same amount down in Burgess Hill, and they all would come round Havers Heath. Because this is a Category A railway station, it gets more people go through Havers Heath than the other 2 stations. It's just a fact of financial life, that is, unfortunately. I also, which hasn't really come out, but this is just using my experience, a lot of the people who objected to increasing the numbers were taxi drivers themselves. They did not want to increase it. And I've been through 3 of these iterations. We've done all this, you know, these unmet needs. It shows how long I've been. It is sad. It is really, really sad. But we cannot tell them where they've got to work. Now, going to these options. Well, option 1's a no-brainer. Not going to happen. Option 2, remove the current cap on Hackney vehicle numbers with the proviso that all licenses be issued with WAVs. Well, John's just said we can't get rid of one of our taxi licenses. And who's to say that they won't do that? I mean, we've all heard stories. They've been in front of our committee. They've gone down to the railway station in Havers Heath. They've seen a wheelchair. They don't stop. They come onto this thing. Oh, blimey, not doing that. Up Borrell Road, round there, sit a few minutes in Waitrose car park, and then come down and hope they're being picked up by somebody else. They don't want to do it. This is a sure way of getting a lot of taxi drivers coming into the market, but not truly doing what we ask them to do. So option 2, probably not. Option 3, well, going to 12 years from 10 years, to me, is the worst thing we could possibly do as a council to increase the age of the fleet that we have proudly managed to get them to go to 10 years, to get modern vehicles, and we've had them in front of our committee, haven't we, again, saying that they want to, I've got a fantastic Jaguar, but it's 12 years old, can't have it. So I just feel that, as sad as it is, I just cannot, I will not vote for send it out to consultation to 12 years. And I just don't know how we can get around it. So sadly, as sad as it is, I think option 4 is the only one really that we could go for. I don't think we can do anything, because you'll get all the aggrieved taxi drivers saying, hang on a second, why have they got a taxi? Why can they go to 12 years? Why this? Why that? But I'm only one of the committee, but I know what I'm going to vote, and it isn't going to be for any of those otherwise. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Councillor Cherry.
Thank you. Oh, have I switched myself on? I'll do it if it's... Oh dear. Sorry, apologies. I think there's one thing we're forgetting, is that I think it was Network Rail announced a couple of months ago that Wivelsfield Station in Burgess Hill, at long last, is going to be getting full disabled access, and that includes wheelchair users going to London and back down to Brighton. So obviously wheelchair users are going to be they are going to need transport to take advantage of this new disability access in Wivelsfield. And, you know, for that reason, I'm fully in support of option 3. I can't see there's a great problem in extending the age of the vehicle to 12 years. I myself drive a 13-year-old Mini Cooper, which is in great shape, and I love it, and I hope to drive it for a lot longer. And also by extending it to 12 years, it encourages more drivers to purchase these vehicles because they've got, you know, got another couple of years to go. So that is why I am fully in support of option 3.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could I ask our officers, you said that there is available a license for a wheelchair accessible vehicle. Could you tell us how old, how much length of life this particular vehicle would have?
Chair, it's not the actual vehicle, it's the licence which has been returned to us. So if we had an application, the applicant would detail the vehicle that they wish the licence to be attached to.
So it's just a license, so there's no vehicle?
There's no vehicle at the time, so the licence has come off the vehicle, and the licence has been returned to the council to reissue to a alternate vehicle and an alternate applicant.
And the alternative applicant would not necessarily be a wheelchair accessible vehicle?
It would have to be a wheelchair accessible vehicle. It's one of our wheelchair accessible licences which can only be issued to a wheelchair accessible vehicle.
And therefore this would be a Hackney licence?
That's correct.
But we haven't got any more Hackney carriages, have we? We're limiting it to 154.
Yeah, we're limited to 154. So there's only ever 154 Hackney licences at the moment. But what licence holders can do is return their licence to us, and then we reissue it to a new vehicle proprietor. So the licence is separate to the vehicle. So at the moment, there's 153 licensed vehicles out in Mid-Sussex, and we've got one licence which we are looking to issue to a wheelchair accessible vehicle.
Okay, I don't know if I quite understand, but anyway, Councillor Eaves, come back to you.
Thank you, Chair, for
Actually,
letting me
it was
speak.
me next.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's quite all
Councillor
right.
I
Witherby.
beg your pardon, Councillor Debelle.
That's quite all right. Thank you very much, Chairman. John, I can well imagine, knowing you, how much effort you've put into putting this report together and putting these suggestions together. It's a thorny problem, and I can see that what we're looking to try to do is to funnel taxi drivers and disabled driver vehicles for the benefit of the common good. Now, I totally understand what Councillor Eaves was saying as well about the problems, but I just don't feel that we've hit on it. I think that it's one thing to try and incentivise people to do something that we should obviously try to do, and it's quite another when they just won't do what you want them to do. And as Councillor Marsh has said, I don't think also with the amount of time, with the amount of driving in these vehicles over a 10-year period, I mean, they are really get to the end of their lives, possibly gone beyond it by that time. So I don't think that that's the answer. I don't feel that we've found the right thing here. I think that some form of incentivisation might be better. And we've talked about the cost of these special licences, but I think that some form of incentivisation might be a better way around it. And I just don't feel that we've discovered the right thing so far. But thank you, John, for all your efforts.
Thank you. Councillor Eaves.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I would just emphasise that I think this is a Burgess Hill problem, not a Haywards Heath or East Grinstead problem. That's the thing. Mr. Hatcher told me that, in fact, the footfall at Burgess Hill Station plummeted after COVID, during and after COVID, and that's why nobody wants to operate out of there. So somehow we have to get the taxi people to cover the Burgess Hill area. Is there any possibility of attaching a licence to a particular rank, or would that make everything even worse?
There's not that facility within the legislation to have taxi areas within this council, so you couldn't mandate that a driver could only work in a particular town or a particular area of the district.
Mm-hmm. And could the officers answer my question about whether other authorities stipulate 10 or 12 years age for WAVs? And also on the Wivelsfield Station point, Councillor Chapman's just told me that the Labour government have cut a lot of the train activity project, so that even that might be in danger now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Kenny.
Right, thank you. First of all, a question for officers and indeed for more experienced members than I. Do we have any understanding of the percentage of journeys that a wheelchair accessible vehicle makes are with wheelchairs on board? In other words, how much of that business? Because I think that somewhere in this mix, there's a bit of, that's part of, I think, understanding the solution, because I absolutely agree with John Debell, Councillor John Debell, that we haven't really put our finger on it here. I could potentially get quite Stalinist, to use the, about this, and say, look, when it comes to building regulations, we have building regulations that ensure accessibility in homes for the future. I don't understand why we're not making that the case for taxis. Personally, I think I could quite go for option 2. And there may well be squeals from the taxi community, but these things have a way of balancing themselves out. There's also the question of there may be another way, pursuing John's line, different way of tackling the problem. If it's the finance for the vehicle, and if it's people paying commercial rates of finance in order to get a vehicle, then maybe even the council or some other bodies, and this is, I understand it would be outside the remit of this committee, but we maybe could have some other initiative that simply offers preferential finance to people who are taxi drivers or have a license or something like along those lines, to enable them to get to the vehicles. Although that may only be part of the problem, because I do understand from the comments that have been made, there's a behavioural thing in here as well. And I'm clear about that. But that option might be removed from the taxi drivers if we move to a position where all the taxis have to be wheelchair enabled. Because I was very mindful of when John's explanation, when he gave it, of what the action would be for a taxi driver who refused to take someone with wheelchair access, who has a wheelchair access, and it would be straight to prosecution. This is a different ball game from sets of stars. So it's been a really interesting debate. I'm leaning towards option 2 and getting tough with the taxi driving community, but also examining, as I say, outside the remit of this committee, some other forms of statement that our council could make. You know, it may not even need to be cash outflow. It may be standing behind certain forms of loans for wheelchair accessible vehicles or something along those lines. I'm not going to try and come up with a solution right now, but I think we need to, there are several issues in there. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kenny. As Councillor Debell said, some incentivising, perhaps financial or whatever. John, would you like to comment upon that concept?
I certainly wouldn't like to comment on any incentives given to drivers in respect of purchase of wheelchair accessible vehicles, because in essence that's far above my pay grade and what I would even consider making any comment on.
Okay.
With regard to Councillor Kenny's comments with regard to wheelchair usage, I don't know how many, what the percentage is of particular wheelchair accessible vehicles taking people in wheelchairs. What I will say is there are some extremely good drivers out there who just do wheelchair accessible journeys virtually all the time, rarely work off the rank. Because there is such a demand for wheelchair accessible vehicles, they're kept busy all day.
Yeah.
And there are a number of drivers, and they should be commended that they do look at taking wheelchair passengers. In fact, one driver who recently took on a wheelchair accessible vehicle is quite happy to do the licence. He actually went out to the local care homes in Haywards Heath and Burgess Hill, actually informing them that he had the vehicle, it was available, and as a result has got a large amount of business from it. However, I will say that there are a number of drivers of wheelchair accessible vehicles who perhaps rarely take people in wheelchairs because they've got the vehicle licence and they just concentrate on working the vehicle off of one of the railway station ranks and will just work off the railway station ranks. Unfortunately, we cannot condition that if you're a wheelchair accessible vehicle, you can only take people in wheelchairs. If drivers' particular business model is to work off the rank at all times, then that's the business model they decide to take. Although if a wheelchair user arrives at the rank and wants to use their vehicle, they've got to take them. That doesn't help the wheelchair user who's at home struggling to find a driver to come and pick them up to go for their journey. There was, I think that's the questions with regard to wheelchair usage. As I say, percentage I don't know. With regard to making all Hackney vehicles wheelchair accessible vehicles, that I think is something separate that the committee would look at, because there would be extreme difficulties converting the current saloon vehicles to wheelchair accessible vehicles. And then you also have issues surrounding the Equality Act, that if you mandate that your fleet is all wheelchair accessible vehicles, then you're actually discriminating against people who have difficulty getting into wheelchair accessible vehicles. So you should have a mix of different vehicles within your fleet.
Okay, thank you, John. Councillor Marsh.
Councillor Knight hasn't spoken. I think he ought to go before me.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. I was just picking up on Councillor Eaves' thing. I just wonder if it is sort of parochial to Burgess Hill. The reason I say that, I work with the PRM passengers with restricted mobility at Gatwick Airport on a daily basis, and I can tell you that there are hundreds of people in wheelchairs turning up there. So how do they get there, you know? Many of them are completely paraplegic who can't move, and we have to lift them into their aircraft seats. So I wonder if I mean, one person is more than enough, but I've just wondered if, you know, if it's a small problem we can deal with. We're trying to encourage, as Councillor Kenny says, incentivise people to pick up disabled people, but I don't think the scale of the problem is as big as perhaps we're imagining it, because of where I work at Gatwick. As I say, there are hundreds of wheelchairs turning up every day.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marsh, are you going to repeat yourself or new ideas?
Well, no idea. It's nothing to do with the disabled part of it. It's the adding to 10 to 12 years.
Okay.
Frequently we get people come in front of our committee and they try and argue their car is much better than it actually is, and we frequently turn them down. I have a 2-year-old car, and with the greatest respect, Councillor Cherry, my 2-year-old car has got infinitely more safety features on it than your 13-year-old Mini. And that's what we have to say to it. As each car goes out, it's got more safety features. And our overriding policy in this council is the protection of the public. And we should never, ever forget that. So just by thinking we could push it out another couple of years, you're potentially putting somebody into a 12-year-old car when somebody's worked their butt off and got a brand new car on the rank, and they've got infinitely more safety features, and they get into the one next door to them and it's 12 years old. And I know which one I would much rather be in, and it's not the 12-year-old one, or your 1300.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Now, I think that I don't want, I think we've had a good discussion, everybody. I think we need to now address the issues which are the four options. Now, I will ask our legal, Mr. Toogood, will you tell us how we should approach this? There's four options. We have one vote each. So how shall we go about doing this, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So you've obviously got a recommendation in front of you, which is to approve option 3 to go out to consultation. If you vote on the recommendation as stated on the papers, then that's the option that would go out to consultation. If members want to propose alternative recommendations, then obviously it's open to members to do that. They'll need to get a seconder for that motion, and then the debate will move on to that motion and then vote on that motion.
Okay, so we would proceed first by having a vote on option 3. And after that, if it fails, we would look at a alternative proposal.
That's one option. Alternatively, you could ask members for alternative motions now and see if there is a proposer and a seconder for those motions. So you've got the option of either going to the recommendation and seeing what the vote is, or asking if members have got an alternate motion that they wish to put now, and seeing if that can be seconded and debated.
Right, so alternative motion, Councillor Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I would like to propose that we don't go with option 3. I would like to go with option 2, which is remove the current cap with the proviso that only be issued for WAVs, because we know we've got one floating around. There's a system in John's office. That's the paper copy here, it's not the vehicle. So that's the one I think we should go for, option 2. Option 3, I can't agree with it going to 12. And something's got to happen, so option 4, reality is, that's just putting our heads in the sand. So I would say option 2.
Option 2, and this will be out for consultation about removing, okay.
And I've got a seconder as well.
Okay, seconder by, so, Councillor Eaves.
Could I propose option 3? Does it have to be exactly at option 3, or can I?
Yeah, I think we have to do one at a time. I think we start, Mr. Toogood says, so we can put forward, we've had a proposal and a seconder
So you've
for
got a
option 2.
proposer and a seconder for option 2. So if members want to debate option 2, then that's open to members. Or if you want to go straight to the vote, then you would be voting on going out to consultation on option 2. Well, if that motion's defeated, then obviously you can accept alternative motions at that point.
Right, I think we've had a pretty thorough debate, so I think we go to the vote, if you committee. Well, is it a new?
The debate anew on the option.
Okay, Councillor Kenny.
No, just very, very quick. So I support option 2 as well. I think I mentioned it when I was speaking earlier on. I support option 2.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just interested, Councillor Eaves suggested she might have a proposal with a slight change on option 3. So if we were to take Councillor Marsh's proposal, we might vote for something, not realising that Councillor Eaves may have something compelling that afterwards we're like, oh, if only we knew. So
Okay, so.
if we could turn to Mr. Toogood to find out what the actual procedure should be, because we might vote for, as I said, we might vote for something and realise there was a different option available to us. Thank you.
I understand.
Can I help you there? If Councillor Eaves is a better one than option 2, I can always withdraw it.
I'm willing to go with the committee. So Councillor Eaves, if you have a alternative option to option 2.
Thank you, Chair. My option was going to be option 3, but without the 3 fitness tests a year, making it 2 fitness tests a year, because I think this is too onerous on the taxi drivers. So that was going to be my proposal. I think 2 is not enough. It's not going to help the people we're trying to help, which is the wheelchair users in Burgess Hill.
Thank you, Councillor Eaves. That actually throws a spanner in the works, because that's entirely changing from 10 years limitation to 12 years. So I feel that we should, option 2, it's out for consultation.
Yeah,
So
I'm willing to proceed with option 2 after hearing that.
Yes, yes. I think we proceed with option 2. I think the idea of lifting the barrier on 10 years I think the committee would find that unacceptable. So we're going to go for option 2. Everybody, you got it in front of you. You don't have to, so if you please vote for option 2. We're going ahead with the first recommendation, the 8-week consultation, and the second will be that option 2 will be approved. Okay, so if you please vote. Got 10 votes so far, 11, one more. I'm keep pressing, thank you. So that's 11 in favor of option 2 and 1 against option 2. So that's the way forward, folks. Thank you very much for the debate. Right, item number 9. Draft payment licensing policy. So, Mr. Brown, will you introduce this?
Thank you, Chair. This paper is in respect of the a draft payment licence policy. The committee would be aware that during the COVID pandemic in 2020, the government introduced the Business and Planning Act, which made a streamlined system for businesses to place tables and chairs outside their premises. Previous to that, it was a rather cumbersome way of getting permissions, which had to be done through the Highways Department of the County Council, and it also was subject to quite a lengthy consultation period. Due to the pressures on the economy and the need for the industry to be able to rebound back from COVID, the provisions of the Pavement Licensing Act were brought in. Initially, they were brought in on a 12-month basis, and that was renewed by the government each subsequent year until the introduction of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, which came in earlier this year. The Regeneration and Levelling Up Act made the provisions for pavement licences permanent. It increased the duration of pavement licences to 2 years from 1 year. It also introduced the ability for licences to be renewed. And additionally, it added some powers to the licensing team to actually ensure compliance with licences. In the regime under the Business and Planning Act, we in fact didn't have any powers to ensure compliance. We had to rely on the Highways Department of West Sussex County Council to assist us in that respect. But we now have powers to, in our stepped approach, to gain compliance and ensure people are licensed. With regard to the now permanent legislation, the policy has been written, which will detail to members and to businesses and members of the public as to how we will administer the pavement licence regime going forward. So they'll be clear on their expectations when they apply for a licence and the expectations during the licence. Obviously, there are certain restrictions. As officers, we ensure that there's the accessibility requirements are complied with any new licence to ensure that wheelchair users, people with pushchairs, have sufficient space to be able to access the pavement in respect of any licence which is granted. The pavement licence only applies to the highway, which includes the pavement. It doesn't include businesses which may well have outside areas as part of their curtilage. For example, in the Broadway coat and similar premises have an outside area which they have a seated area. That's on their land, so it's not covered by the pavement licence. And again, looking at the same area, the Broadway, you may be aware of Safari Pizza, which is on the corner. They do have tables and chairs outside their premises, which is on the highway, and that's subject of a pavement licence. Subsequent with the licence is obviously a fee, which my colleague Lucy will speak to yourselves about in respect of the fee setting. The fee setting is there to actually recover just the costs of administering the pavement licensing regime. Previously, the government capped the fee at £100 because they were trying to encourage businesses to use this facility. But they also provided to the council a burdens payment to take account of the extra money that was being incurred by the licensing team to actually administer the pavement licensing scheme. Now that the legislation has become permanent, there's no burdens payment, and so therefore we have to use the fee system to actually recover our costs, but that would be a separate consideration. So the draft policy has been written. It's attached to the report, and the committee are recommended to endorse the policy to go out for the 8-week public consultation.
Thank you. Can I just add, some of us were queried the increase in fees to 500, Lucy, so if you'll kind of elaborate upon that, thank you very much.
Of course, thank you, Councillor Henwood. So, as you've heard, the fee was £100 during COVID, but there was that new burdens money from government, and that's gone. And that's the really important point, that we must now recover our costs through the licensing regime. To give you a bit of background and perhaps the size of the problem we're dealing with, we currently have 23 pavement licences, 15 are in our towns and 5 are in our larger villages. We are waiting for 2 renewals to come in as well. But of the licences granted, 5 are to big chains, not just local businesses. It used to be administered by county pre-COVID, but you've heard that post-COVID this has come down to the district council. I've explained that there was new burdens money and that's gone. And so we are proposing that the fees are at the cap that has been set by government of £500 for a new licence and £350 for renewals, and that's a 2-year renewal. However, even charging that £500, I've got a cautious estimate of how much this is going to cost the council, and it is in the region of £700, and that does not include the costs of compliance inspections and enforcement and responding to complaints, and we do get complaints. This only applies to those businesses who want to use the pavement, who want to use the highway for their tables and chairs. And it's about ensuring the health and safety of all users of that pavement, those in wheelchairs, those that are partially sighted, those that have got prams or pushchairs. And it's all about protecting the public and through this licensing regime. So those costs that I've mentioned, the fee that I've mentioned, works out at about £10 per week for the first year of licence. 2 pints of beer, I don't know how many coffees that would be, sat at a table in a cafe. And then the subsequent 2 years, it would be about £3 a week to the business. And so this is different to other charges that we might place on the public. This isn't a charge on the public, this is simply a licence fee to those businesses that wish to put chairs and tables out. Now, in light of the council's financial considerations and our financial situation, we do consider it appropriate to set the fee at that level that we are permitted to, so that we can recoup as much of these costs as possible. We've also got to be consistent in our charging, and you will know that we've agreed the maximum charges in other parts of our business. And so it must be right that we are consistent in this area and we charge the maximum we are permitted. So at this stage of the process, officers are asking to go out for that 8-week public consultation. And of course, council will make that final decision when we've heard back from that public consultation. Of course, officers will report back to you on those findings in that consultation. And also we're going to keep an eye on what neighbouring authorities are also charging. we're keen to progress this policy now, because we are aware of the number of businesses using the highway without a licence. And this new legislation does allow environmental health officers, licensing officers, to enforce against those businesses to either licence correctly or remove their tables and chairs. And so I hope that gives you a bit of rationale of where we are as officers with these fees. Thank you.
Thank you. So just a couple of comments. Of course, the license, it's simply a license. It doesn't relate to how many tables or chairs you have out. I would also like to look at the recommendations, because there's an addition to the recommendation. So if you see on page whatever it is, 29, the recommendation, the committee are recommended to endorse the draft payment licensing policy at Appendix 1 before public consultation, to also include consultation on the proposed fees of £500 and £350, and to report the outcome of the consultation to this licensing committee.
Not the council.
First, to us. That's what I felt we should, because there's been quite concern over the increase 500%. So that is the recommendation which is going to be put forward to the committee. So we can now open this for discussion. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to get killed by this. Through you, can I ask Lucy or John, so even with you've just said £700, and you want to hopefully charge £500, so you're effectively saying the rest of all the council tax payers we have are subsidised in the 23? That doesn't sound right.
Thank you. I'm effectively saying, with my rough estimates as it stands today, we're running at a loss. We're not in cost recovery territory with the £500.
Okay, so yeah, can I continue, please?
Yes.
Because I do think that's quite powerful, but I like your additional to the recommendation to come back to the council, come back to here. But that's not to say we wouldn't still come up with £500 or £350 the second year. So I suppose it's to test the water to see what's out there. But as you said, there were 5 chains, and I think I probably know what those 5 chains are. So yeah, I think that's an admirable compromise.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Knight.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have particularly a problem with the fee, other than we're sort of supporting a few chains. But what does worry me is the council's going to be losing money. So my question is there a possibility not to issue any licences?
Okay, can I just comment upon it? There's 15 in towns, 5 in villages. 5 out of the 20 are chains, so it's not a majority of chains having this payment license. Okay, yes, clarify, John.
Councillor, we're not in a position to refuse licences because the fee doesn't cover our costs. You'll be aware there's many other licensing areas, especially the Licensing Act 2003, where the fees are set by statute and haven't been increased since 2005, which we run at a loss with many things we do. So if we received an application, then we would process the application and deal with it accordingly. It's not something that we could refuse.
Thank you very much. Councillor de Bell.
Oh, thank you very much. No, it occurs to me that it also gives a degree of protection as well, because if they're actually paying a licence fee to put these tables and chairs out, it says we are authorised, and I think that there is that to be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Any other comments? Oh, Lucy,
Yes,
do you want to come back?
that's exactly right, Councillor de Bell. And indeed, you've heard that we've got people out there at the moment that aren't licensed, and this new legislation will give us the opportunity to enforce. So we're keen to get on with that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cherry.
Thank you, Chairman. I wondered if there are any thoughts about much smaller establishments. I'm thinking of a couple of little cafes in Burgess Hill on the London Road, which actually have only got two tables and chairs outside. And I wondered if there was any consideration to vary the fee for very small establishments or look at business turnover rather than applying this sort of blanket maximum, which I know is probably appropriate, or in fact doesn't indeed cover all your costs. But there are establishments out there that just have a couple of tables and chairs out, and it does seem rather harsh that they would be subject to the same fee as, you know, the likes of Costa Coffee or, you know,
Yes.
Cafe.
Thank you. May I?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Yes, I can appreciate the sentiment indeed, but the process of licensing is the same if you've got 2 tables or 10 tables. And also, if we counted tables, we might end up with 1 table of 12 chairs or 6 tables of 2 chairs, and it's just unmanageable. It wouldn't be good policy to do that. And of course, we've considered that in our rationale, but it's the licensing process that's the same. Hence, it takes the same time to process a licence, be it for several or fewer to chairs and tables.
Thank you very much. Councillor Marsh, is it a new point?
It is, believe it or not.
Okay.
Just, it's an answer to Councillor Cherry about the, disproportionate amount of that. There are other ways that we can help these these people through business rates and stuff like that. Is that correct? Because I know in my own village we've got 3 shops, because they haven't got the same volume as living in a town. They do get business rate relief. So we have other ways that we can actually help these smaller establishments.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eaves.
Thank you, Chair. Just backing up Councillor Cherry on that one, I can see Ms Corrie's point, but if the small business then decides that 500 is too expensive and they don't put out any tables and chairs at all, you've lost your £500. So that would be a reason for it being more of a pro rata thing. Yeah. Thank you.
Let us hope that people respond in the consultation, because that's what we will be looking at. We will be looking at the response, and if they respond and say this will annihilate our business, then we can consider that. So basically, the recommendation as printed, and the addition is going to be a comma after public consultation, or semicolon, to also include consultation on the proposed fees of £500 and £350, and to report the outcome of the consultation to the licensing committee. So that's what you will be voting on. So if we can have the vote now, please. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. All right, item number 10, renewal of statement of licensing policy. Renewal of statement. So, John.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper before the committee is to seek your views on the draft statement of licensing policy, which is attached at Appendix 1. Before we go out to public consultation for 8 weeks in August. Obviously, if there are significant amendments required following the public consultation, they will then be reconsidered by this committee. The draft statement of licensing policy has been produced in accordance with the provisions of Section 5 of the Licensing Act 2003 and the statutory guidance issued by Section 182 of the Act. It has to be reviewed and republished following consultation every 5 years or as appropriate, and our current policy was adopted in January 2020 and expires in January 2025. The purpose of the policy is to provide guidance to officers and elected members in the administration and adjudication of licence applications, to inform the communities and applicants about the procedures that the licensing authority will follow and the factors that it can legitimately consider when reaching their decisions, and to advise that the policy may address issues relating to noise and antisocial behaviour, but only where the problems take place in or on the premises, but not those problems that are taking place in the surrounding area. Other agencies that we work closely with, such as the Environmental Protection Team and the police, have powers to deal with these issues. Now, the committee will see that we've taken the opportunity to review the policy, taking into account the amendments to the Licensing Act and the Section 182 statutory guidance. And the main changes to the policy are that the policy now outlines in more detail the licensing authority's expectations and guidance to applicants in the consideration of the licensing objectives. We've clarified in further detail the legal requirements surrounding applications and subsequent determinations by this licensing authority. And the policy also reflects the updates to the Section 182 statutory guidance in relation to temporary event notices. And we've included information that the 182 guidance mandates in relation to spiking matters. As I said, the consultation will be for 8 weeks. And obviously I'm willing to take any questions that the committee may have on the draft policy.
Committee, can I just draw your attention to the recommendations? There's a little bit of additional. So recommendations on page 29 or whatever. The committee are recommended to endorse the draft statement of licensing policy 2025 at Appendix 1 before public consultation, following public consultation, and subject to there being no substantive amendments proposed, that adoption of the policy be delegated to the Assistant Director of Communities. So it won't come back to us. So if there's any debate going on, any discussion? No? So can I ask you to vote for this recommendation with the additional? Thank you. Now you're doing the next.
Just do that.
No, you introduce it.
No, you introduce.
You do it. Thank you, that was unanimous. Thank you very much. Now we proceed to the next item, which I'm delegating to my vice chair.
Thank you. Item 11 is the review of the animal welfare policy. Could I turn to you, John?
Thank you. Members will be perhaps pleased that this is the last paper before yourselves, and very much like the previous one, it's a review of our current animal welfare policy. The current policy came into effect on the 1st of February 2020. Good practice is that it should be reviewed at least every 5 years, or at other times when considered necessary, for example, in respect of significant changes in relevant legislation or guidance. In respect to the animal welfare policy, I'm pleased in some respects to say that there's no significant changes in the relevant legislation and the guidance, and the policy which is before yourselves is in fact the same policy that we adopted back in February 2020, but good practice states that it should be re-adopted and go out for public consultation. So that's the matter before yourselves, and the committee are recommended to endorse the draft policy before it goes out to public consultation.
Thank you. Are there any questions? None. Right, I shall read the recommendation. The committee are recommended to endorse the draft animal welfare policy at Appendix 1 before public consultation. Following public consultation and subject to there being no substantive amendments proposed, that adoption of the policy be delegated to the Assistant Director of Communities. If you'd like to vote. Thank you, that's unanimous.
Okay, thank you very much, Vice Chair. So, item number 12, questions pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 1210.2, due notice of which has been given. I have none. So if we just remain in our chairs for a few minutes, please, until we're stopped. Oh, I closed the meeting at, that clock is not quite right, 8:30. Thank you, committee, very much.